What comes to mind when you think of a landlord? Is it some Scrooge McDuck sort of individual? Well, hello. Oh, Jamie, you were just in court. Was this about your tenant? Like, Samantha, you were in court about the eviction? What happened in court? But she's lived there for 5 months without paying rent already. I thought the magistrate. Well, they say that you made some minor mistake in your paperwork, so they've dismissed the case. She's been there for 5 months, though. This doesn't make sense. You have proof that she didn't even show up? Wow. All right, I'll have to talk. I'm recording right now. I'll talk to you later, okay? All right, I'm sorry, Jimmy. All right, bye. Jimmy's a friend of mine, and the story begins when the tenant just suddenly stops paying. She had inhabited the place for almost a year, and all of a sudden, she just stops paying. It's not because she's not working, nothing like that, just stops paying. Jimmy tried to reason with the tenant by trying to talk to her, texting her, sending her letters, emails. Nothing worked. The tenant simply refused to respond. No response. The tenant's name is Samantha. After trying to negotiate with the tenant, Jimmy decided to do the paperwork. I actually offered to help him because I had done this paperwork in the past in another state, but I guess new state is quite different. And this was a petition to help Jimmy get a court date so that he was able to evict the tenant. Did not work. As you heard in that phone call, the judge dismissed the case. This was despite the fact that the tenant did not even show up or did not even make an effort to show up despite being served. If you think Jimmy is a wealthy individual, you're very mistaken. Jimmy is actually a refugee who had immigrated to the United States and has worked really hard to get where he's at. He actually has 2 jobs, and he only got a 3-unit house so that he could not only just pay his mortgage for himself, but also so he could rent to provide a service to the society that had accommodated him. His service has ended up being a nightmare. Jimmy was forced to hire a lawyer, and as I'm speaking right now, that tenant has been in the house for almost 8 months. It would take, the lawyer told Jimmy that Jimmy had to wait for 2 months before he could save his tenant, Samantha, with the paperwork again. So it won't be until probably sometime next year that Samantha could be evicted. That's assuming everything goes well in court. This is not fair. It's ludicrous. So this is happening in the state where I'm in New York State. Laws have been made to protect tenants, but there has been an overprotection of tenants at the expense of landlords. And if you're thinking that this is anecdotal, there are many situations, including cases of millionaires refusing to pay their landlords. This happens because there's this misconception that landlords are these very wealthy individuals who can take a loss. However, landlords are mostly middle class or lower middle class. At least that's been my experience and many people's experience. So the experience that I have personally is that only once did I ever rent from an apartment complex in my rental experience. I've had a lot of rental experience as a tenant, and only once did I ever rent from like a corporation or some sort of large complex. In most cases, in many situations, with people who are making a lower income than I do, to be honest. Hence, remember what I talked about. Fairness, right? Balance. What is the solution? Well, I am going to suggest a more balanced solution that I think could work. Of course, people can deviate from that solution. My solution may not be perfect. The solution is that there has to be balance. Someone like Jimmy or many other landlords were waiting for a year. I've heard of cases of 2 years before they can evict somebody. That's ridiculous. That's not fair. And New York State, it's California, the states, that's unfair, to be honest. And that leads to rents becoming more expensive, landlords being reluctant to rent, people being reluctant to go into that industry, and that affects the prices of rents. It's no wonder that rents in New York City, I mean, it's not the only reason, there are other reasons as well, San Francisco and Los Angeles, one of the major reasons that they're expensive is of policies like this. And it's becoming more expensive in my area too, really expensive. I mean, we never used to see rents above $1,000. Now it's become the norm. It's $1,500, $2,400 to $2,000 for an apartment. This happens when landlords begin to be more risk averse or decide that they got to protect themselves and ensure that they make enough profit. So if you don't pay, they at least are covered. So the solution would be to state that if a tenant does not pay for at least 2 months, then this issue would go to an arbitrator. It doesn't need to go to a judge, because all we have to determine if a payment was made or a payment was not made. If a payment was not made, then the arbitrator would issue an eviction notice, which would give the tenant another 1 month to move out. So 2 months you haven't paid, the landlord files a petition. So you're looking at most it's taking about 3 months to 3.5 months before the tenant is removed from the apartment. There also should be protections to ensure that damages are not done to the property in that process. There are nightmare cases, which have been described in this video, of cases where that can be done. And the way to do that is to state very easily that if there's damage deliberately done to the property, that particular tenant would be issued a judgment to not only pay the past due rent, but also pay for the damage. And the landlord would have the ability to enforce that through courts, maybe through some sort of garnishment, 5% perhaps of the wages, which would deter tenants who may have bad motivations. Most tenants are good tenants. Over 98%, 95, 98% are great tenants. And so this applies to that 2%, which is the case. So that's what I would suggest. And that would lead to a situation in which tenants and landlords are both treated fairly. Now, I will have the next video where I will talk about how the opposite, the evil tenant fallacy. You may think that I'm being biased. I want you to watch the 2 videos, and I'm going to post these videos very close to each other to show that the balance I'm advocating for, I think would be quite helpful. There might be some little deviation for it, but I'll tell you this. Definitely, no landlord should have to wait for 6, 7, 8 months, 9 months to evict a tenant. That's ridiculous. That is utterly ridiculous. And that's not fair. And so I will talk about how tenants can be protected too, and ensure that there's a balance. But there are states out there where tenants barely have very little protection. Thank you for watching, everybody. And please watch the other video where I talk more about how tenants can be abused by the system in some other states. Thank you, and have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.